Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are getting ready to start our 11 a.m. studio visit with Ed Marquand. Ed Marquand started what is now Lucia Marquand in 1978. Since then, the company has produced books for over 300 museums, many galleries, artists, architects, and designers. He started Marquand Editions 10 years ago to create handmade art books for existing and new customers. These collaborations have been acquired by the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Art Institute of Chicago, Library of Congress, and many other collections. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you. And can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, I'm here in my studio in Titan, and I'm going to start my little presentation here, and we'll go through. And there we are. Can everybody see that? Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Tom and Jamie, for inviting me and letting me brag a little bit about Marquand Editions. The main company, Lucia Marquand, is in where Tom works, is located in the back of Paper Hammer in downtown Seattle at 2nd and Union. The books we produce for museums are exhibition catalogs and collection books, and we produce about 50 titles a year. It's a wonderful company, and we've been able to work with so many wonderful institutions, but I'm particularly fortunate to have worked with so many very, very talented designers and editors and production people, Tom certainly being right at the top of that list. In our studio in Seattle, we have a presentation board. Everybody gets to see what is current and being worked on. This is the office. Everybody's sitting at their computers, hard at work and doing good work. In Titan, when I founded Mighty Titan about 16 years ago, I stumbled into this little town outside of Yakima. I was riding my bike. I hit a bunch of goat head thorns in Titan, punctured my tires, and spent the afternoon repairing the tires. And that gave me enough time to notice that there were all these empty storefronts and warehouses in this town. It's an orchard town. And I started to imagine what could happen in these spaces that would be too expensive and just too expensive if I were to try to do it in downtown Seattle. That became the beginning of Mighty Titan, which is essentially a hands across the Cascades business model. We bought up buildings here. We've been renovating them here. Most of our clients and most of our work, though, come from the West Side. And so if we can do production or connect with creatives over on that side of the state and employ people from the town here and teach them how to do work at a very high level, we could realize far more creative ambitions than I ever could if I just tried to do it in Seattle. Titan's a little town. It's about 1,400 people. It's 15 miles to the west of Yakima, if you're familiar with the Yakima area. This is my studio. It was a former pharmacy. And when we started buying up properties in this town, most of the spaces had been empty for about 10 years. Nobody could figure out what to do with these spaces. So in the intervening years, we've bought a number of these buildings and put creative businesses in them. And that's gone a long way to help sustain Titan, but also to give it this reputation for solving small town problems creatively and inclusively. It's very important for us that the studio not just be a good place for me to realize my dreams, but to hire people from the community and teach them to do work at a very, very high level. And that benefits the community, and it also connects so many people in this town with the broader creative world that they all know is out there. I'm sort of the medium between these different worlds. This is the inside of the studio. This is where I'm talking to you from now. It looks out onto a beautiful little park. It's much more analog than the studio in Seattle. And one of the first people I hired is Maria Solorio, who had never bound a book before when she started working for me. She's actually worked for me for almost 15 years now. And she's now one of the best production bookbinders in the country. She does unbelievably wonderful work, and she's a delight to be around, and she's a very good manager for the bindery. Steve Morgan is a fellow from Natchez, the town just down the road from Tieton. And we hired him to set up the Mosaic Studio. That's a whole nother story we won't get into. But he also quickly picked up on letterpress printing. So for a number of years, he was our main printer, our main letterpress printer. The Mosaic Studio was sort of blown up. So he's not doing, we've in a way, we've kind of mothballed the Letterpress Studio for now, but we plan to reinvigorate it in the months to come. Again, more pictures of my studio, lots of books, lots of scissors and cutters and glue and cutting boards and that sort of thing. We have a couple of presses. This is a Vandercook 419. It's a beautiful Vandercook and has the advantage of having an adjustable bed. You see some sheets that Steve's printing on the left. That's a book we did for a photographer in Chicago. The idea was to set this studio up, but to make handmade art books, to expand the services we could offer the publishing company in Seattle. Since we're pretty well connected in the art world and the art publishing world, certainly, that's primarily offset based. But in the art world, people are always looking for opportunities to do things and approach problems from a different perspective. And to have a studio where we could really make handmade art books was our goal, and that's pretty much what we're still doing today. The cutter on the right is for board. That's our board shear. It's a massive thing that's well over 100 years old and is still performing. We probably use this piece of equipment more than any other. We have some big old presses. This is for gluing this is the final stage where you take the book block and you glue it into the hardbound covers. We also use a lot of weights. These are just craft paper covered bricks covered with tape. And you need to keep a lot of things flat. We're a production book bindery, which means that instead of just doing one-offs, we might have to do 25, 35, 50, and they all have to be identical. Since this is a business, it also has to be done very efficiently. We have to be very conscious of costs. And we often produce these things. There are always collaborations with artists or designers. The financial model changes with each project. But with many of the projects we do in the studio, we have to deliver for a fixed price. So it's important that we really work efficiently and quickly. This is definitely a business we're running here. And there are lots of ways for projects to go south, and we try not to make any of those mistakes. More books, you could never have too many books. This is a Smythe Stitcher. So it's from the 1920s. If you open up the book and you see the stitches in the gutter, this is a machine that can apply those threads. This machine was made in, I think, 1920. The Smythe company is still in business and we can still get parts for it. It's pretty remarkable. It's a wonderful piece of almost steampunk machinery. Truth be told, we don't use it that often because it really is a beast. But when we do use it, it's a lot of fun, and I'm proud to be the owner of this noble piece of old equipment. Here's a detail. You can see some of the complexities. We do some hand stitching for some of our larger editions. It's a lot of work, but Maria is so good at it. And for some of the big photo albums we do in collaboration with photographers, we have to hand stitch these things. In the Letterpress Studio, which is in a different building, we have a fair amount of lead type. We have a nice selection of display wood type. But truth be told, we do so much more work with polymer plates, occasionally magnesium plates. It's just so much easier to set the type, and the quality of the typesetting is actually better. But if you just can't stand to do anything on a letterpress that isn't purely handset type, well, here's the studio. We had an old guy who is no longer alive, unfortunately, Jerry. He was our first letterpress printer, and he was a whiz at setting metal type. He could just, bang out sentences and paragraphs like nobody's business. Unfortunately, he's gone to the big letterpress studio in the sky. The collaborations, this is a collaboration with an artist, a Colombian artist. He came here and we spent about a week working on this edition, did these beautiful pencil drawings. We made digital prints of the pencil drawings. And then this was a case. Each one of the case editions came with one of his paper sculptures inside. And then the book slipped in from the tray down below. We also made a flat book that opened up. We have a picture of that. And I think we made, I think we made 50 of the bigger box with the sculpture in it. And I think we might have made as many as 200 of these. You can see the case opening. And this was the book resting inside. These were French fold pages with Japanese stab stitched binding. And that was a finished piece. This was another pretty elaborate one we did. A photographer in California hired us to envision this case to house these photographs that he had taken of a single tree in Costa Rica. And the tree was important to a scientist, a research environmental scientist who teaches at Stanford. So it was a three-way collaboration between the scientist, the photographer, and our studio. So this is the book sliding out of the case. The book, the lid opens, and then this tree ends up standing up, and it houses two letterpress books and the photographs. We made 25 of these. I think we've sold all but 3 or 4 at this point. And the institutions who were the most interested were either museums or libraries or college libraries that had an environmental program and a book arts program. This was easily the most complicated and kind of the most nightmarish project we've ever taken on. I love how it turned out. I'm very fond of the artist, but it was a 2-year endeavor, and the artist insisted on using materials that were never designed to do what he wanted them to do. It's a 12-volume magic box. It's called The Magician, and it's a graphic novel. We made, gosh, how many? I think we made 25 of these. But all of these books slide into the magician's case. You can see the magician's case on the center right there. And these are all the books laid out. We had an exhibit in the studio in Seattle. But it even included a hat that had a flame. When you opened up the lid of the hat, it triggered this piece of toilet paper in light, and it flickered, and it was actually the transformer to run the video that was in the box that you see right there. We ended up placing these in very good collections. The Metropolitan Museum of Art has one, the Library of Congress, the Art Institute of Chicago, several museums around the South, Columbia University. It turned out to be of particular interest because of the graphic novel, but also the book arts. And it's those sorts of collaborations that we really enjoy taking on. This one, oh boy, it was really a beast, but we all survived and ended up with something we're very proud of. This was photo paper. These were glued back to back. It sort of brings back nervous tics thinking about the production involved in that project. This is the photographer in Chicago. You saw Steve printing some of the sheets earlier on. This was interesting because it was a three-part case binding, with the far left piece being the back cover of the stitched booklet that went with it, tipped in photographs in the center, and then the far right receives the turned pages. The prints themselves were furnished by the photographer, and then we just did the casework and the letterpress printing. I've done a fair amount of work with a publisher in Seattle, Craig Hoover. This was an edition on Australian photographers, contemporary Australian photographers who use 19th century photography techniques in a contemporary form. So each of the editions had a book that you see on the right with tipped in original photographs printed and furnished by the photographers, and then a case that is all handmade. That's what we did here, tipped in label, and then there was a little case of frameable photographs that supplemented the book itself. This is another one we did. This was the first we did with Craig Hoover on California missions. These are platinum prints, letterpress printed pages, and then tipped on, and then stitched and bound. I think the edition for this was about 40 copies. This is for a photographer, Ron Reeder, and is quite a character, and wanted to do just, I think we might have only done 10 copies of this book, but it's an oversized album, hand-stitched, letterpress printed, tipped in. So this model we've done for a number of photographers, and it's worked quite well for us. This one is on the photographs of Robert Dawson. He has made a career of himself going around the country and also the world photographing public libraries. This is an edition of 15. It's a pretty simple edition with the Chicago post screws in a case. We used UV ultra paper for the captions, and then the pages themselves were his digitally printed sheets. So the text overlays the image, so you can learn about the image from the overlay, and then you open up the overlay to reveal the original photograph. This is one I'm particularly proud of. Reiko Sudo is an internationally renowned textile designer in Tokyo, and she's for her 30th anniversary, she wanted to do some publication that was really special, but she really didn't want to just do a conventional book. She wanted to do something that was more like an object. She came from Tokyo to Titan and stayed for better part of a week, and we started sketching out ideas and prototyping some directions, and we quickly came up with this idea of doing a bento box. And instead of photographs of her work, we would use her textiles, the ends of production runs from 30 years of her business, and actually make an object out of the remnants of her textiles. So there are 4 layers here. The top layer is on the lower left. There are 2 books, letterpress printed. One is a biography of her. The other is the index of the fabrics that are featured in the edition. We made an edition of 50 copies of this. We've sold about 30. They've sold to, again, very important collections, the Los Angeles County Museum and the Met and Art Institute and the Asian Art Museum. And Bainbridge has bought several of our editions, and I'm proud to have them at the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art. The second tier is on the lower right, and that is their collages that her studio put together. We letterpressed these frames and then cut out the windows. So they are frameable, but you can also just dig through them, and it shows different techniques. So if you're a textile designer or a fashion designer and interior architect, this is quite a resource. If you're really interested in the way her fabrics are made, can't do much better than this. The third tier is an album, hand-stitched, long-stitch album that features, I think, about maybe 80 or so swatches and captions that describe the materials and the techniques. And the last tier has 2 trays that feature the tools and raw materials she uses in her practice. Fascinating business. She employs textile villages in Japan that used to make their main business kimono production. And as kimonos have lost popularity in Japan, she's been very good at trying to find innovative textile techniques that rely on the talent of the people who work in these villages, but also some of their old equipment. Here's a better picture of the tray. The trays with the raw materials and tools. So the long stitch album that you saw, this is one of the pages, letterpress printed with a swatch glued to it. And this was how it was displayed. I think this was the way it was displayed at the LA County Art Museum. It's a very, very handsome piece, and I'm proud. She's beloved in the textile industry. So she, placing these things in museum collections was made very much easier because of the connection she has in the design, architecture, and textile world. In the studio in Titan, we also make product for the shop, Paper Hammer. And we have a little shop here in Titan called Titan Made that sells some of the things we make in the bindery. But what you're looking at here are facsimiles. The director of the Seattle Art Museum came to me several years ago. An elderly woman had given some very precious albums, accordion albums and scrolls to the museum. And as soon as the transfer was complete and she had finished the gifting of the albums and scrolls to the museum, she decided she missed them. So the director came to us and asked if we would be able to make facsimiles. So we did. We just digitally printed the contents of these of the albums, printed them very quickly and easily on our digital press in Seattle, and then bound them in the bindery here. Truth be told, the bindery here is much busier than the Letterpress Studio. We're not a commercial bindery in that people can't bring us things to bind for them. We really want to be involved in the production and the design and kind of the thinking through of the projects we're doing. We get a lot of requests to repair Bibles and that sort of stuff, and we don't take any of that on. We just really want to devote the studio to things that we're collaborating on with either other institutions or artists or designers. We do a lot of the sell a lot of journals in the shop in Seattle and the shop here in Titan. And when we're not doing the special editions, we keep ourselves busy doing these really beautiful sketchbooks and notebooks. And Maria's a master at these things. These are boxes, we call them secret book boxes. They sit on shelves like books would, but when you pull them out and open the cover, they reveal a nice little box. And boxes are big in the studio. We really like making them, and Maria's just done a terrific job. So I'm going to, it's the end of this part of the presentation, but I'm going to go back to here. Few things I'd like to point out. In this piece, you see the tree and you see this edge, and I want to point out this here. This is the cover. This is about 28 inches wide. And the tool that we end up using a
We're
lot.
not seeing your screen.
Oh, okay, sorry. That better?
Yes.
Do you have it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we use a laser cutter that we have in the big warehouse that we bought for other reasons, but it's been enormously handy for the bindery. We wouldn't have been able to do this piece here without it, because the tree and the tray and even the circular covers, we'd never be able to cut out as exactly as they'd need to be by hand. But on here, the case, we use the laser cutter to cut binding board, several layers of binding board to exactly the same cut. And that tool is really essential and allows us to do things to a much more precise level than if we were ever just to rely on our board shear. For the Mosaic Studio, we also recently acquired a water jet cutter, and I'm looking forward to projects that involve using the water jet cutter to cut stone or maybe steel or metal or some sort of thing. So who knows what we'll be able to use that for. So with that, I don't think we need to share anymore. So I think that's the end of my formal presentation, but I'd be happy to open it up for questions.
Great, thank you so much, Ed. There's a couple of questions already in the chat, and for everybody else, please feel free to add some additional questions. John Barry had a question about your Smythe sewer. When do you use the Smythe sewer, and when do you bind by hand?
Well, if we only have 20, 25, I'd say 10 to 20, we would probably hand stitch. If we had a production run, say 25 to 50, it takes so long to set up the Smythe Stitcher, and it's very temperamental. But once you set it up, it's pretty stable. We have a size limit on the Smythe Stitcher too. With the big albums we do, we really have to do those by hand. But with the chapbooks or some of the little catalog things we've done, the Smythe Stitcher is, you know, I mean, it is a beast. I'm not going to pretend that it's not, but it's our beast and we love it.
Thea has also a question. Would Maria teach classes or take on an apprentice intern, or are there classes at Tieton, I guess, in general?
Well, Maria is very self-conscious about her English skills, and she learned bookbinding from the two women we hired. There was a woman from Seattle and a woman in Portland who set up the studio initially. I should say, I don't do any letterpress printing. I don't do any binding. I make prototypes and I design for it, but I'm really too much of a klutz to learn letterpress printing or bookbinding. But when Maria was taught, she wasn't taught using classic bookbinding vocabulary. She was just taught the techniques. So I don't think we'd be a very good setup the way we're currently staffed to offer classes. However, that said, we just bought an enormous warehouse across the street from our very big warehouse. And the idea is to eventually move the Letterpress Studio and the bindery over there and create classes and offer workshops and really set up the space for destination education. There'll be an inn next to it so people could come and stay for a week or 2 weeks at a time. And we would invite people who are, classically trained bookbinders and letterpress printers and so on to lead the workshops. That's probably a few years off, but it's definitely how I would like to end my career, being able to set up something as wonderful as that.
That sounds really incredible. Rosie has a question again about the Smythe sewer. Can you point out some of the key components so we can get a sense of how it works, where the paper goes in and what happens to it when ...
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to share my screen again then, and bear with me. So where on here is it? I think, there it is. Okay. This would probably be the best one to show. Okay, sorry, it's a little blurry, and I'm sorry that tray is in the way. The tray should not be there. That's where you set that up on the right. So you have all your pre-folded signatures in sequence, and they're folded in half, and you place them on this saddle right here. So the front part of the signature would be here. The back would fold over on the other side of the saddle. Once it's there, you hit a foot pedal, and there's a hook that comes up and pushes the signature into this mechanism, which rocks back and forth, and it rolls the signature into position so the needles come down and stitch it. And then there's a device that pulls that signature to the back of the machine. The hook comes back ready to take the next signature. So it just signature after signature after signature. And somebody stands in the back of the machine and they pull the stitch signatures out, cut the threads, and then you have to go through the process of adding the end sheets and cleaning up the ragged thread, and then putting them in a press, gluing the spines, and then adding the reinforcing Japanese paper. And then the book block it dries, and then the edges get trimmed, and then it slides into the cover that is part that is made on the cover making machine. I wonder, oh dear, I managed to neglect that. We have an automated case machine with 4 stations. Takes 2 people to run it. You run cloth through a gluer. There's a jig at the second station that holds the glued cloth in place. You take the cut binding board and place it onto the glued cloth with the spine. Then you move to the next station, it rolls the edges over and adheres the edges to the binding board. And then you run the binding board through the wringer at the 4th station, and that squeezes everything to the proper pressure. And with that machine, that's kind of our industrial revolution. We can do in an afternoon what would take 2 people using glue rollers and X-Acto knives and that sort of thing. It would take a week and a half to do what that machine allows us to do in an afternoon. Are there any more questions about studio equipment or technique while I have this the slide presentation up?
I have a question about slide 28.
Slide 28.
It's not so much about the equipment.
Uh-huh.
So on the board, well, there's 2 questions, I guess.
Sure.
In the box or on the box, it looks like there's a top and then a little overhang underneath.
That's
Kind of on the far left edge.
Oh, right here?
Yeah, and I was
Yeah.
wondering, is that an aesthetic decision or a structural decision or kind of both?
Kind of both. We wanted to call attention to the slab that is the top cover.
Yeah.
And if it were flush to the edge, it just didn't feel right. We prototyped this several different ways, and this really was the way that seemed to make the most sense. We also left the charred edge here.
Cool.
That the laser creates. And sometimes, oh, well, actually to that point, the Nuno box, where's our Nuno box? This would be useful. These trays here, they were also made on the laser cutter. So we took these strips of cypress wood and cut them all, and they're all joint cut and everything. And we could do that with the laser cutter. It would be extremely difficult to do this by hand. But then once the wood was cut, we soaked it in bleach water to remove some of the char, and then we had to sand off the edges because we really weren't looking for that rustic edge. But again, the laser cutter just comes in so handy for these things that are, yeah, they're books, but they're really objects. And that's what we wanted when we set out in the studio. And over the years, we've acquired equipment around here, not necessarily for the bindery, but we've been able to find bindery uses for them.
It's super cool. Are there other questions waiting, or can I ask a few more? Okay, I don't hear anything. I'm going to go ahead and ask. On the Route 22 book, are there 2 stitched sides? Because I'm working on a book that looks maybe a little bit like that, and I'm not having much success with my mock-up. Yeah. So I can see that there's a binding between the photograph with the big white frame and the page that's on the right.
Yeah.
But if you scooch way to the left side, is that that's another book with another binding, right? Another sewn.
Yes. Yeah, it is. We used Japanese paper, reinforcing paper, to glue these together. With these big albums, our Vandercook press isn't large enough to print larger than, say, a sheet that's 20 inches by 13, and that's sort of pushing it. And with these albums, the text needs to be bigger than that. And so we have to come up with these ways to join facing pages in order to have a full spread. So in this case, the hand stitching is here, but we used reinforcing paper to adhere the sheets together. Now, the last page of this booklet is glued to the cover.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's so interesting to see what I've been trying to create actually made.
Yeah, well, it took a few prototypes. Now, you notice here,
that's the one.
right there, that was a breakthrough for us.
So I only have one piece of board there where you have two.
Well, see,
and it's not working.
This booklet, this essentially is its own booklet that just got glued to the other half of this three-part. You've got the front, you've got the spine, you've got the back. Yeah. So this piece here glues onto the back of that of that book. If you leave your email address, I'd be happy to email more photographs of it.
Oh, thank you, because I would love to see the right spine, the spine on the right side.
Yeah, that's a rounded spine. That's not a hard spine. That's just a rounded spine made from the binding cloth and a little bit of reinforcement.
And so mine's a naked spine there. That's maybe why it's not working. Oh, there we go. I thank you so much. I'd be happy to email for additional photos.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to help. Yeah. Anybody else have any questions?
Ed, I had a question, and it goes back to something that came up during yesterday's conversation panel by Hannah Pierce, who runs a little press over in Brooklyn, New York.
Yeah.
Like short run, hand bound special editions, and sometimes they sell for $200 or $400 or more.
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about like accessibility for those kind of books, because a lot of us couldn't afford that kind of book day to day, but having it in a library or having it in a museum is like a way for that connection to be made. So how have you connected to libraries and museums to be able to get your projects there?
Well, the book arts world at this level is a very small world. And since I came into it not from a book arts point of entry, but from an art world publishing point of entry, I don't know that I'm taken as seriously by serious fine press people. I'm not particularly interested in literary stuff in the studio. It's more creating an object that's a book and an object, and the collaboration with people I like working with. Each project comes with a different economic model. Sometimes these are direct commissions. Usually they're direct commissions, but occasionally, like with the Nuno box, the fabric box, we developed a partnership in that. So it's an interesting question, because when museums buy these things, they are usually bought by the library department within the museum, because that accessibility is very important to them. So you can go to the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art, you can go to the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco or LACMA or whatever, and see these things. Actually, LACMA bought it as an art object, and that does restrict access. But curators and registrars and people in collections understand that these are things that really need to be picked up and opened and explored. So if someone is really interested and they're serious in seeing these things, it's not that hard. A lot of the editions are just sold to private individuals, and they can make them totally available. And then we always have copies here, and if somebody wants to make their way to Titan, more than happy to share it with them. But as far as marketing and selling these things go, we do some direct marketing to the people we know in the museum world, but there are a few trade shows. The biggest one is Codex. Codex is held every other year. COVID kind of threw off their schedule by 2 years. It's held in the Berkeley area in May or June. I'm not sure when the next one's scheduled. It's a biennial. Book artists come from all over the world to attend that. We exhibit our work there, and that's where we've made a number of connections and sales. Once you sell to these institutions, then it's easier to sell future editions to them because they are the ones making the acquisitions. So you set up this network of people who are interested in these things. And there are a few dealers around the country. We've had some luck with Vamp and Tramp. They're based in Alabama, but have toured around the world. Although the husband of the couple died recently, and I think Vicky, the survivor, is kind of winding down the business. There's Kelmscott in Baltimore. They've sold a few of our editions. And then just word of mouth, people see our website and contact us. They are luxury items, there's no question, but they are pretty cool.
Any other questions by the audience? Feel free to unmute yourself and just talk away.
I have about 50. So we'll just hang quiet and see if anybody else has some they want to get in. Go for it, John.
Not a question, but just a sort of a coincidence. I was going to the library the other day and pick up a couple of books, and it's Asian Pacific American month. And Tom, you'll recognize this.
Oh.
It's grabbed my attention, and then of course I found out what it was, and I said, "Oh, cool!" And then I looked inside and went, "Oh, of course I know who designed this and who published it."
Yeah.
Well, so reality check for you.
Yeah. Good. So Rosie, fire away.
Oh, okay. So with the Nuna box, how did the Japanese textile designer find you and decide to work with you? Because it occurs to me that there are many beautiful bookmakers in Japan, probably.
Yeah. Well, we used to print when I started the company in the late 70s. In the early 80s, we started printing in Japan, and Japan was where art book printing was pretty regularly done by the major publishers, the major art book publishers. So I started going over there, and for a while I was making 5 trips a year to Japan to supervise the printing of the books. And the Nuno shop in Roppongi, I discovered very early on. Always went there. It was just a fabulous shop in this wonderful design building, the Axis building. So I was always familiar with their work, but the more time I spent in Japan and the more time I spent with people who had Japanese connections, the more inevitable it became that the two of us would bump into each other. And it was through an intermediary who made that connection. She didn't come to the States just to visit Titan to talk about this project. She was making a presentation to Nike and was going to be in the area and made a detour here. But in the course of working on the project, she also had an exhibition at the Cooper Hewitt. And so I took a couple of mock-ups to New York when she was in New York, and we spent a day or so reviewing the prototypes and figuring out how to work together. I think if she were to commission something like this in Japan, she could certainly do it, but it would have ended up being a very different thing. And we decided early on that the American market was a much stronger market for this than the Japanese market.
So was a big part of it just the heart and knowledge connection that you had with her? Is that part of what helped it?
And I think she had confidence that I could figure out how to actually get these things into the world. You know, sure, but really, she was the one who introduced me to the curator at the Cooper Hewitt. She was the one who arranged the purchase by the Cooper Hewitt of one of these things. She introduced me to a number of private textile designers who ended up buying them. You know, so it really was a collaboration, certainly a creative collaboration, but also a business collaboration. So I think I provided some of that talent, but more in the mechanical side of selling, not necessarily that I'm so well connected I can pick up the phone and sell an edition to every librarian I talk to.
There's so many components of this process. Right?
Yeah, there definitely is. Now, Thea, let's see, I'm finally checking my chat here. Oh, yeah, okay, this is a good one. Suggestions for changing career and entering the press bookbinding field. Super interesting question. You know, there are people who do both printing and bookbinding, but it's much more common for people to be doing letterpress printing and separate studios doing the binding. And there are people who are just really good printers, and there are people who are really good binders, and I'm neither. But the book binding, I think, can be a fairly lucrative, or at least sustainable, if you're willing to take on book repair and book conservation. If you take those aspects of the field on, that can build very, very handsomely, and that can help offset the costs of setting up your studio, buying the equipment, and doing the stuff that are more passion projects. But it is a small enough world that once you get into this funny world, it doesn't take long to figure out who the players are. Seattle is extraordinarily fortunate to have one of the best, if not the world's best bookbinder. Claudia Cohen is her name. And she collaborates with artists who do the art part or the printing part, and she just does the binding part. But she's reached the point in her career where she really can just send out an email to a select group of librarians and collectors and completely sell out of an edition immediately. Her work is just unbelievably beautiful. And I am not sure that she even has a website, but her name is Claudia Cohen, Cohen with a C. And I just have so much admiration for her. If you can take a look at her work, you won't regret it. They're really exquisite. Oh, somebody has, yeah, okay, Jamie just found heavenlymonkey.com, Claudia.
That's her, yeah?
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Great. One last question from anybody, last comment before we take a quick break? All right. If not, thank you so much, Ed, for being here today. This has been fantastic. And thank you for sharing so much about your work and everything that you're doing in Tieton. I can't wait to visit myself.
Well, you all have an open invitation. And if you are planning a trip, I give weekly tours Saturdays at 11 o'clock. Today, I've moved it to 12:30 because I'm with you guys at 11 o'clock. But we go through the bindery and the Letterpress Studio, the Mosaic Studio, which is really just so exciting and thrilling. We have a big contract with Sound Transit to do 25 mosaic murals, and we're in full tilt production on that right now. Trimpen Sound Space is here. Trimpen is moving here. He's moved his studio here, so he's hanging out. And then a couple of other places. It's sort of a three-ring circus, but if you do plan on coming, try to make it around 11 o'clock on Saturday, because you'll get a better show that way than if you just show up. All right.
Awesome.
And do I have Rosie's email here?
Yeah, we can connect you over.
Okay, if you would.
We'll send an email to connect you to. So
thanks so much.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Well, good to see everybody. Good to see you, John. And thanks so much. This was fun.
Thank you. And
have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.